On the morning I buried my husband, the pews inside the chapel stared back at me, rows of empty wood where my family should have been. Wind rattled the stained glass. My phone rattled harder with 36 missed calls and one sharp message. "We need to talk now." While I stood beside a coffin, they stood beneath fairy lights raising champagne toasts. Grief carved me hollow, but betrayal carved me sharp. And in that hollow silence, I made a vow. If they chose celebration over compassion, then I would choose silence over blood, and that silence would become my weapon. The church smelled of lilies wilting too fast, their petals curling as if they could not bear to witness what was happening. I stood in the doorway, clutching the folded program until the edges bent under my grip. The pews stretched before me, polished wood glowing under the muted light, but they were empty, so empty it felt like a punishment. Not one familiar face. Not my mother's stiff silhouette, not my father's stern shoulders, not even Lydia's nervous laugh that once filled every room. My sister was across town celebrating her new engagement, and my parents were there too, clinking glasses. Even Tessa, my so-called best friend since high school, had chosen sequins and champagne over mourning. I wanted to believe they would walk in late, breathless with excuses, maybe even ashamed. I kept glancing at the doors each time the wind rattled them. But no one came. The silence was louder than any organ hymn could have been. It pressed on my chest, a weight heavier than grief. I felt as if the empty pews themselves were whispering, "You are alone. You have always been alone." The pastor's voice droned, a prayer that blurred into the hum of the heater. My eyes fixed on the coffin, dark oak polished until it shone like water at midnight. Inside lay Ethan, the man who once promised me I would never face storms by myself. Yet here I was, storm-tossed and abandoned. The betrayal cut deeper than the loss because I could not understand how people who claimed to love me could so casually erase me from their calendars. When the service ended, strangers approached, neighbors I barely spoke to, co-workers of Ethan who had shaken his hand more times than they had spoken to me. They offered polite condolences, hands on my shoulder that slid away too quickly. Hollow words like, "He's in a better place," echoed without meaning. None of them knew Ethan's laugh, or the way he used to hum while fixing the sink, or how he would bring home peppermint tea when I had a fever. None of them knew me either. They were stand-ins for the family that should have been there, shadows pretending to be warmth. Outside, the wind bit through my black coat as the pallbearers carried the coffin to the waiting grave. I followed, my heels sinking into the damp grass. The sky was a bruised gray, heavy with clouds, as if it, too, was mourning. The casket was lowered, ropes groaning as though reluctant to let go. My knees trembled, but I forced myself to stay upright. If I fell now, no one would catch me. The earth waited, dark and patient. A shovel cut into the soil, and each clump of dirt that struck the coffin sounded like a door slamming shut. I clenched my jaw, refusing to cry. Tears would blur the moment, and I wanted to feel it all. The abandonment, the rage, the grief, like sharp glass under my skin. Across town, laughter no doubt rang from crystal glasses, forks clinking against plates of cake. That imagined sound sliced through me worse than the cold wind. I pulled my phone from my purse, more out of reflex than hope. The screen lit up instantly. 36 missed calls, most from my mother, some from my father, a cluster from Lydia, and even 2 from Tessa. One text hovered at the top. "We need to talk now." The audacity nearly made me laugh. They couldn't be here, but they could flood my phone. They couldn't sit in the pews, but they could demand my attention as if I owed them anything. I turned the phone face down on my lap and stared at the open grave. "Maybe you were right, Ethan," I whispered, though no sound left my throat. He had always warned me that family love could be conditional, that blood did not always mean loyalty. I had argued with him, insisted they loved me in their own way. Now, with the casket vanishing into the earth, I saw how wrong I had been. The final shovel of dirt fell. The pastor closed his Bible. People drifted away, their footsteps muffled by grass. Soon, I was alone at the grave, the air still except for the fluttering of the program in my hands. The pages tore slightly where my grip had been too tight. My chest hollowed, as if something vital had been scooped out. I tried to breathe, but the air tasted metallic, like betrayal itself. When I finally turned toward my car, the cemetery stretched vast and deserted. I imagined the glow of fairy lights across town, Lydia's diamond catching the sparkle, my parents beaming. Even Tessa's laugh threaded through the night. They had all chosen joy over grief, celebration over compassion, and in doing so, they had chosen themselves over me. As I slid into the driver's seat, I looked back one last time at the grave. The mound of dirt was already smoothing under the weight of shovels, as if erasing Ethan's presence. My heart clenched, but colder than grief was the certainty forming inside me. I was not just grieving a husband, I was grieving the family I thought I had. The lilies from the funeral still lingered in my living room, their fragrance thick, cloying, already curling into decay. I sat on the edge of the sofa, coat still wrapped tight around me, Ethan's photograph balanced on my knees. The silence was suffocating. My phone buzzed over and over from the table, a restless insect that refused to die. I let it tremble unanswered, my body too heavy to move. Then came the doorbell, sharp, insistent, relentless. I ignored it once, then twice, but it rang again, longer this time, until the sound carved itself into my chest. Finally, with my legs stiff as stone, I rose and pulled open the door. There she stood. My mother, dressed in the same silk gown she had worn to Lydia's engagement party. Sequins caught the hallway light, glinting like shards of broken glass. Her hair was pinned perfectly, perfume sweet and dizzying, as though she had walked straight from celebration to my doorstep. For a moment, my breath froze. She looked untouched by grief, untouched even by shame. "Mara, we need to talk," she said, her voice clipped, rehearsed. Not a tremor, not a shred of apology. I gripped the doorframe until my knuckles blanched. "You missed his funeral," I whispered, my throat raw. Her expression flickered. Annoyance, not guilt. "Sweetheart, it was unfortunate timing. Your sister's engagement was important. Once in a lifetime. You'll understand one day." The words cracked something inside me. Once in a lifetime. As if the burial of my husband was repeatable. As if the ground could open twice for the same body. A bitter laugh scraped out of me, sharp and low. Important. Champagne and diamonds outweighed burying the man who treated me better than this entire family ever has. Her jaw tightened. She stepped past me into the house as though it still belonged to her, as though Ethan's death had left me incapable of boundaries. She perched on the sofa, crossing her legs delicately, the fabric of her dress rustling like whispers at a wake. "Mara, listen," she began, tone shifting to business. "There are responsibilities now. Certain assets. Your father and I don't think it's wise for you to handle them alone. The house, the savings, Ethan's company shares. It would be best if they were redistributed." The word slammed into me like a physical blow. Redistributed. Not comfort, not remembrance, not support, just division, as though Ethan's life had been a cake and she had arrived late to claim her slice. "To who?" I asked, though I already knew. "To Lydia, of course. She's starting her new life with Grant. She'll need support. And you'll be fine. You've always been strong." Strong. That word had been their excuse my entire life. Strong meant I didn't need tenderness. Strong meant I could be stripped bare and still smile. Strong was their license to neglect. I sat across from her, the photo of Ethan now gripped against my chest. "So you skipped his funeral to toast her engagement, and now you've come here to ask for his legacy, too." She shifted just slightly, but lifted her chin in defiance. "Don't twist this. It's family duty. Your sister deserves the best. Don't be selfish." The word selfish burned hotter than grief. My hands trembled on the photo frame, but my voice stayed quiet, almost too calm. "You think I'm selfish because I won't hand over what Ethan built with his own hands? Because I won't let you erase him the same way you erased today?" She mistook my stillness for surrender. Her lips curved faintly. "Good girl," she murmured, touching my arm like she had won something. I rose slowly, every movement deliberate, and walked to the door. My heart hammered not with weakness, but with something sharper, harder. "Come in, Mom," I said earlier. Now, as she walked out, sequins glittering in the porch light, I whispered after her, so softly she couldn't hear, "Not a chance." When the door shut, I leaned against it, lungs burning. The house smelled of lilies and betrayal. My phone lit up again, buzzing endlessly, but I didn't answer. Let them panic in their gowns and tuxedos. Let them sweat over why I wasn't picking up. The silence would be my shield, my weapon. And yet, in that moment, I felt the weight of helplessness press down again. I could not bring Ethan back. I could not rewrite the empty pews. I could only stand here, abandoned twice, once by death and once by blood. The night after my mother left, I could not sleep. The house creaked under the pressure of winter winds, every sound reminding me how hollow the rooms felt without Ethan's presence. I wandered into his study, the one space that still smelled like him, cedarwood, ink, and faint peppermint tea. His desk was immaculate, every paper clipped neatly, pens aligned, drawers locked with keys he had always told me were for emergencies. I remembered the small lockbox he kept in the bottom drawer. My fingers trembled as I pulled it out and set it on the desk. For a moment, I simply stared at it, the metal cold under my palms, as though opening it would make his absence final. But when I turned the key, the box opened smoothly, revealing a stack of documents tied with a rubber band, and on top, an envelope with my name written in Ethan's precise handwriting. My breath caught. I slid the papers free. The will was the first document, stamped with the lawyer's seal, every line meticulously drafted. My eyes scanned down the pages until they froze on the most important line. I leave all my assets, including our home, savings accounts, and company shares, solely to my wife, Mara Collins. A sound escaped me, something between a sob and a sigh of relief. For the first time since the funeral, I felt steadied, as though Ethan had reached back from the grave to brace me. He had trusted me, and only me, with what he built. No redistribution, no conditions that gave my family leverage. It was mine, all of it. I leaned back in the chair, tears burning at the edges of my eyes. But then, as I sifted further, another envelope slid loose, marked in Ethan's hand. Addendum, to be opened only if contested. My pulse quickened. I unfolded the pages inside and began to read. The addendum was short but sharp, a safeguard Ethan had crafted with the same foresight he used in every project. In the event that my will is contested by family or outside parties, a portion of my company's shares and liquid assets will be redirected into a charitable trust for the Cedarbrook Hospice Foundation. I exhaled in a shudder. The twist of it both stunned and comforted me. If they tried to take from me, they would not succeed. They would only lose more. Their greed would feed the very hospice where Ethan and I had volunteered together, where we had spent hours fundraising for patients who had no family at all. He had ensured that any attack on me would only strengthen what he believed in. My fingers traced the signature at the bottom, Ethan's name steady and unshakable. Relief flooded me, unexpected and fierce. The burden of their threats felt lighter now. I had more than just my will to stand on. I had his strategy, his silent shield. I sat back, staring at the two documents side by side. On one hand, his unconditional trust in me. On the other, his careful contingency, a net that would catch me if they tried to push me over the edge. The mix of grief and gratitude overwhelmed me, crashing like waves. For the first time since the pews had been empty, I felt like the ground under me was solid again. The wind rattled the window panes, but instead of dread, I felt steadiness. Ethan had prepared for their betrayal long before it happened. He had known them in ways I had refused to see. Perhaps that was love, too, not only protecting me when he was alive, but preparing the world to shield me when he was gone. I pressed the papers back into the box, slid the key onto the chain around my neck, and whispered into the silence. Thank you, Ethan. I won't let them undo what you built. For the first time in days, I slept, the will and addendum secure under lock, my heart steady with the knowledge that I was not defenseless. The war my family wanted had already been anticipated, and Ethan had written the first victory into law. The next morning, I tucked Ethan's will and the addendum into a folder and drove to the office of Mr. Adler, the family lawyer Ethan had trusted for years. His office sat in a brick building on Main Street, the kind of place people passed every day without noticing. Inside, the air smelled of leather and old paper, a library of other people's secrets bound in contracts. Mr. Adler was a tall man in his 60s with thinning silver hair, his glasses perched low on his nose. He rose when I entered, his handshake firm but warm. "Mara," he said gently, "I'm sorry for your loss. Ethan spoke of you often." Hearing Ethan's name from another person's lips nearly undid me, but I steadied myself and laid the folder on his desk. "He left this," I said simply. Adler adjusted his glasses, flipping carefully through the will and the addendum. His eyebrows rose, first in recognition, then in approval. Ethan was thorough, very thorough. He's left you everything, and this addendum, it's a clever safeguard. If contested, your family only hurts themselves. They'll lose to the Hospice Foundation. Relief flickered through me, but Adler's expression shifted, darkening slightly as he leaned back in his chair. "Still," he said, voice low, "you should be prepared." "For what?" I asked. He folded his hands. "Your family may try to challenge the will anyway. Grief, or greed, can push people into reckless actions. They could attempt to fabricate documents, claim Ethan made promises, even pressure you to sign papers under duress. It wouldn't be the first time I've seen families tear each other apart like this." His words chilled me. I had already seen their cruelty when they abandoned me at the funeral. But to imagine them forging Ethan's words, twisting his legacy, made my stomach knot. Adler must have read my fear in my face. "We'll act quietly," he continued. "Send certified copies of the will to every relevant institution, banks, the company board, the probate court. That way, any fraudulent claims will contradict official records. You don't need to argue with them directly. Let the law answer for you." I nodded slowly, grateful for his calm. "So my role is to stay silent?" "Yes," he said firmly. "Silence is your defense. Do not argue with them. Do not sign anything. Do not even engage. Every word they use against you will only reveal them. Ethan built this structure to protect you. Trust it." For a moment, I almost smiled. Ethan, even in death, had orchestrated a plan where silence was strength. Adler slid a notepad toward me. "Write down every call, every message, every encounter. Documentation is your weapon. If they try to intimidate you, we'll build a record. If they escalate, we can even request a restraining order." My hand trembled slightly as I scribbled a few notes. Then my phone buzzed again on the desk. I glanced down. An unknown number. One new message. "Sign the papers or you'll regret it." The words glowed on the screen, stark and cold. My chest tightened, not from panic but from recognition. They had already started. I turned the phone so Adler could see. His eyes narrowed. "Don't respond. Save it. Forward it to me. This is exactly what I mean. They'll try fear before reason." I swallowed hard, nodding. Part of me wanted to delete the message, to erase the threat. But another part, stronger now, understood that this was evidence, a breadcrumb leading back to their desperation. Adler leaned forward, his gaze steady. "You are not powerless, Mara. Remember that. The law is already on your side. Let them dig their own grave." His words settled into me like stone. I placed the phone back into my purse, its screen still buzzing faintly with another call I didn't answer. For the first time, I understood that silence wasn't just avoidance. It was strategy, armor forged by Ethan's foresight. As I left Adler's office, the winter air slapped my cheeks, but I no longer felt fragile. My family believed they could corner me with pressure, with threats, with guilt. They didn't realize that every step they took only tightened the trap Ethan had built for them. I pulled my coat tighter and walked to the car. The phone buzzed again in my pocket, another unknown number. I let it ring out, my jaw set. They wanted me to regret. Instead, they would. I sat at the kitchen table that evening with Ethan's will spread out before me like a map, but my eyes were no longer seeing the words. Instead, they drifted backward, through years and memories, to the very beginning of my life inside this family that had now turned its back on me. "You're the strong one, Mara." That phrase had followed me like a ghost for as long as I could remember. My mother said it when I was 8, when she asked me to walk Lydia to school while she stayed behind for her book club. She said it again when I was 12, carrying groceries up the porch steps while Lydia sat inside with a glass of lemonade. "You can manage, Mara. You're strong." At the time, I thought it was praise, a badge of honor. I told myself strength meant I was special, dependable. But the truth, as the years stretched on, was that strong became permission. Permission for them to lean on me, to ignore me, to withhold affection because they believed I didn't need it. I remembered one winter evening vividly. Lydia had slipped on the ice and scraped her knee. My father rushed to her side, lifting her into his arms like she had broken both legs, carrying her into the house as if she were porcelain. That same week, I came home with a split lip from a schoolyard fight defending her. My mother barely looked up from the stove. "Mara, you'll be fine. You're strong." The favoritism had not been sudden, I realized now. It had been the air I breathed growing up. Lydia, the delicate one, the one who needed protection, was the family's jewel. I was the shield, the buffer, the one expected to survive anything thrown at me. The memories piled higher, each one heavier than the last. At Christmas, Lydia always opened the first gift while I cleared the wrapping paper from the floor. On birthdays, her cakes were tiered and frosted, mine often a simple pie from the store. My mother's words played like a broken record. "She's fragile, Mara. You understand. You're strong." I thought about the night I introduced Ethan to my family. Lydia had flirted shamelessly at the dinner table, laughing too loudly at his jokes. My parents chuckled indulgently, as if her behavior was charming rather than rude. After Ethan left that night, my mother pulled me aside. "Don't be threatened, darling. Lydia just needs attention. You know you're the grounded one." At the time, I swallowed my irritation. Now I saw it clearly. Even in my moments of happiness, I was asked to step aside. The twist of recognition cut me deeper than I expected. Their betrayal at the funeral hadn't been a sudden rupture. It was the inevitable climax of a pattern decades in the making. They had been abandoning me all along, in small ways that built into this final, catastrophic desertion. I gripped Ethan's photo on the table, my thumb brushing the glass. He had seen it too. That was why he had warned me that blood did not always mean loyalty. He had witnessed the quiet favoritism, the way my parents treated Lydia like a crystal figurine and me like the table it stood on. He knew what I hadn't dared to admit. I was never truly chosen by them. The weight of that truth pressed down until I could hardly breathe. My chest ached, not just from grief for Ethan, but from the realization that the family I had defended for years, excused for years, had never once defended me. The empty pews at the funeral weren't an anomaly. They were the most honest reflection of what I had always been to them. I closed my eyes, memories flashing like cruel slides. Lydia crying because she lost her doll, my father driving across town to buy her a new one. Me crying over a failed exam, my mother shrugging, saying, "You'll manage." Lydia sick with a fever, wrapped in blankets while I fetched her water. Me sick with pneumonia at 15, my parents leaving me alone with a bottle of cough syrup because they had a dinner party. The injustice stacked higher, a tower of neglect teetering above me. The audience of my mind, if there had been one, would have gasped at the sheer imbalance, the sheer cruelty disguised as normal family life. It wasn't just betrayal now. It was betrayal that had been rehearsed my entire life. When I opened my eyes, the will still sat before me, but its words blurred with tears. Ethan had known. Ethan had chosen me, completely, unequivocally, in a way my family never had. That was why his gift mattered more than money. It was proof. It was validation. It was the first time in my life that someone had looked at me and said, "You are the one who matters." And yet, with that validation came the ache of injustice so old it felt eternal. I leaned forward, pressing my forehead to the cool surface of the table. My body shook, not from weakness, but from the crushing awareness that I had never been strong because I wanted to be. I had been strong because they had forced me to be. The house creaked again, a ghostly echo. But it wasn't Ethan haunting me. It was the childhood I had never truly left behind. The following afternoon, I returned to Ethan's study, drawn there as though some invisible thread still tied him to me through the objects he left behind. Dust motes swirled in the sunlight streaming through the blinds, dancing across the spines of his books. I opened the desk drawers one by one, searching not for anything in particular but for some echo of him I hadn't yet discovered. In the bottom drawer, tucked beneath a stack of old utility bills, I found a small envelope sealed in wax. My name was written across the front in Ethan's deliberate handwriting, the kind he used for documents he wanted taken seriously. My pulse quickened. I carried it to the table and broke the seal carefully, as though the slightest tear might erase his voice forever. Inside was a letter, several pages long, written in ink. His words rose off the page, his voice so clear in my head that for a moment I felt he was standing beside me. Mara, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't shield you the way I promised, but I want you to know I thought about this, about them, about you. I know your family, and I know what they might try when I'm gone. I built protections into my will, but there is something else you should know. I turned the page, my hands trembling. Years ago, when Lydia first started college, I created a trust in her name, a scholarship fund, but it is not accessible to her unless certain conditions are met. The money will only be released if your family shows unity, if they stand beside you rather than against you. If they abandon you, if they contest the will, the scholarship dissolves and transfers instead to the Hospice Foundation. I wanted to give Lydia a chance, but only if she and the others could prove they deserved it by treating you with respect. I stopped reading, my breath shallow. He had known. He had planned for their betrayal, even as he offered them one final opportunity for grace. I couldn't tell you this while I was alive because I didn't want you burdened with it. But if they come after you, remember, their own greed will strip them of even the gift meant for them. And if by some miracle they choose loyalty over envy, then Lydia will have the support to start her new life. Either way, the power is yours to hold. Trust yourself the way I have always trusted you. By the time I reached the signature at the bottom, his familiar scrawl, steady and sure, tears had blurred the ink. My heart ached, but in that ache was a flicker of hope, a small flame lit by Ethan's foresight. He hadn't just left me assets, he had left me strategy, protection, even mercy. I leaned back, pressing the letter to my chest. The twist of it all struck me deeply. While my mother barged into my house in her silk dress demanding redistribution, Ethan had already outmaneuvered her from beyond the grave. Lydia's golden future depended not on my sacrifice, but on her own behavior and that of our parents. If they continued down the path they had chosen, abandonment, greed, cruelty, they would lose everything, including the scholarship they assumed was guaranteed. For the first time since the funeral, I smiled, though faintly. It wasn't joy, but vindication. Ethan had believed in me so completely that he had turned their betrayal into their punishment. I placed the letter back in its envelope and tucked it into the lockbox with the will and addendum. The weight of the box felt different now, less like a burden, more like a weapon I didn't have to wield. It was already sharp enough to cut on its own. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. I sat in that stillness, imagining my parents' faces if they ever discovered the truth. They thought they could strip me bare. They didn't realize Ethan had set the stage, so their hands would close on smoke. The sense of helplessness that had smothered me since the empty pews lifted just slightly. My grief was still raw, but alongside it now lived something sturdier, the certainty that Ethan had given me every tool I needed, hope threaded through my veins, fragile but undeniable. For the first time, I felt that perhaps I could endure not just because I was strong, but because someone had cared enough to make sure I didn't have to be strong alone. It was a Sunday afternoon when the storm came to my doorstep. The knock was not gentle, it was pounding, heavy and unrelenting, the kind of sound that did not ask permission but demanded entry. I froze halfway across the living room, Ethan's photograph still in my hand. The lilies on the table had wilted completely, their petals browning at the edges, the smell sour in the air. When I opened the door, the hallway was crowded with familiar faces. My mother stood first, lips tight, eyes scanning the house as if it already belonged to her. Behind her loomed my father, his jaw set like stone, his presence filling the space with quiet authority. And there, glittering on her finger, Lydia's engagement ring caught the light, her smile sharp and satisfied as she stepped across the threshold without invitation. But it wasn't just them. A figure followed close behind, and my chest clenched when I saw her. Tessa. My best friend, or at least she had been once. She avoided my eyes for a second, then lifted her chin, aligning herself physically and emotionally with Lydia's side. In that instant, the twist cut deeper than I expected. It wasn't enough that my family had abandoned me. They had brought my friend to betray me too. I stood still, one hand still gripping the photo frame, the other pressed against the door. The four of them filled my living room, and the space suddenly felt smaller, suffocating. My father was the first to speak, his voice low but firm. "Mara, this has gone on long enough. We're here to settle things." I forced myself to breathe evenly. "Settle what?" My voice was calm, but my pulse hammered in my ears. "The assets," my mother cut in sharply. "The house, the accounts, the company shares. Your sister deserves her share. You don't need all of it. Holding on to it makes you look bitter." Bitter. The word sliced me, but I refused to show it. Instead, I looked at Lydia, who smirked like she had already won. "Come on, Mara," she said sweetly. "He's gone. You don't need all these things to remember him. Let us take care of them." Her tone was sugar laced with poison. My stomach turned, but I stayed silent. Tessa shifted then, stepping forward slightly, her voice soft but firm. "They're right, Mara. Don't make this harder than it has to be. You'll thank us one day." The betrayal burned hotter because it came from her lips. Tessa had once held my hand through breakups, had stood beside me at my wedding. Now she was here, aligning herself with my sister, echoing my mother's words like a rehearsed chorus. I let the silence stretch. My father frowned, impatient. "We're not leaving until you agree. Sign the papers, Mara." The room thickened with tension, every heartbeat echoing in the walls. My hand tightened around Ethan's photograph. My instinct screamed to argue, to shout, to tell them the truth, that Ethan had left me everything, that their demands were worthless. But I remembered Adler's words. "Silence is your defense. Do not argue. Let the law speak for you." So I breathed, slow and deliberate, and finally spoke. "If you want to talk about assets," I said, voice steady, "then you'll do it at Mr. Adler's office, not here." A ripple of surprise moved through them. My mother's mouth tightened, Lydia's smile faltered, my father's nostrils flared. Tessa's eyes darted away as if even she hadn't expected me to stand my ground. I stepped aside, holding the door open. "Until then," I added, "this conversation is over." For a long moment, no one moved. Then Lydia let out a short, mocking laugh. "Fine," she said, brushing past me, her perfume sharp as she swept out the door. My mother followed stiffly, muttering something under her breath. My father gave me one last look, heavy with threat, before stepping outside. Tessa lingered the longest, her expression unreadable. For a moment, I thought she might apologize, but instead, she whispered, "You'll regret this," before slipping out behind the others. I closed the door slowly, the latch clicking into place. My whole body trembled, but not with fear, with adrenaline. For the first time since the funeral, I hadn't yielded, hadn't explained, hadn't begged. I had stood still, and it had been enough. The house was silent again, but the tension still hummed in the air. I looked down at Ethan's photo, his steady smile meeting mine through the glass. "I did what you would have wanted," I whispered. My voice was quiet, but it felt stronger than it had in weeks. That night, the adrenaline from the confrontation still burned through me like static in my veins. I couldn't sleep, so I sat at Ethan's desk again, the lamplight painting long shadows across the papers. I pulled out the folder of documents Adler had advised me to organize: bank statements, insurance records, old mortgage files. My hands moved mechanically, but my mind replayed Tessa's voice, her warning, "You'll regret this." As I sorted through the stack, one envelope slipped loose, thicker than the rest. My name was typed across the front in bold letters, but the return address made my stomach clench. It was from the First Cedarbrook Bank, dated 3 years ago. I frowned, tearing it open carefully. Inside was a loan agreement I had never seen before. At first, I thought it was a mistake. The pages listed my father, Robert Hale, as the primary borrower, but there, alongside his signature, was mine. Or rather, what looked like mine. I stared at the scrawl, my chest tightening. It was my name, my handwriting, but jagged, slightly off, as though copied from another document. I felt cold all over. My father had used my name as a cosigner on a loan I hadn't even known existed. The amount was staggering, nearly $200,000, and the fine print made the betrayal even worse. If Robert defaulted, the debt would legally fall to me. My breath hitched, realization dawning like ice water poured over me. If I signed anything now, any redistribution agreement my parents shoved in front of me, It could trigger clauses that would make me liable for his debts. The trap was deeper than I had imagined. They hadn't just abandoned me at the funeral. They had built this snare years ago, waiting for the day they could tighten it. I pressed my trembling hands to my mouth. The audience inside me, the invisible one I knew existed somewhere, would have gasped at this twist. It wasn't only greed, it was premeditation. They hadn't stumbled into betrayal, they had engineered it. The bitterness in my chest threatened to break me, but I forced myself to breathe. I had proof that could unravel everything they thought they controlled. I flipped to the final page where the signature sat. The date was clear, the ink slightly smudged, as though rushed. I remembered where I had been that week. Ethan had been in the hospital for minor surgery. I had spent every hour at his side. There was no way I could have been at a bank signing papers. My father had forged my name. Anger surged, hot and sharp. All the grief, the abandonment, the betrayal of the funeral now fused with this revelation. My own father had turned me into collateral. He had gambled my future like poker chips. I shoved the documents back into the folder, my jaw set. This was no longer just about Ethan's estate. It was about years of manipulation finally surfacing. They thought I was still the strong one, the daughter who could absorb the blows, who would stay silent. But they had underestimated me. The next morning, I drove straight to the bank, the folder clutched against my chest. The manager, a gray-haired woman with stern eyes, examined the papers carefully. When she compared the supposed signature of mine with my actual identification, her expression darkened. "This is highly irregular," she murmured. "If what you're saying is true, Mrs. Collins, this may constitute fraud." She photocopied the documents, promising an internal investigation. "Do not sign anything your family presents you," she warned firmly. "If they push you, direct them here or to your attorney." Her words steadied me. Walking out of the bank, the winter air sliced across my cheeks, but I felt stronger than I had in weeks. I now carried not just grief, but evidence, proof of their betrayal written in ink. At home, I placed the fraudulent loan papers beside Ethan's will and addendum. Together, they formed a new kind of armor. They had thought I was defenseless, that grief would weaken me into compliance. But Ethan's foresight and my father's carelessness had armed me with the one thing they hadn't expected: undeniable proof. I whispered to the quiet house, to Ethan's absent presence. "They thought they buried me with you, but they only dug their own grave." The first whispers reached me on a Thursday morning, carried through the hushed voice of a neighbor who stopped me at the grocery store. "I heard the florist canceled on Lydia," she murmured, her eyes bright with the thrill of gossip. "Something about unpaid deposits. Is it true?" I brushed past her without answering, but my pulse quickened. That evening, another message arrived in my inbox from an acquaintance at church. "Your sister's rehearsal dinner is falling apart. Vendors are pulling out. Did something happen with your parents' finances?" By Friday, the rumors had spread like wildfire across Cedarbrook. The caterer withdrew, claiming the down payment had bounced. The band announced they were double booked. Even the venue demanded full payment up front after hearing things. Lydia's dream wedding, the celebration that had stolen my family from Ethan's funeral, was crumbling before it even began. Part of me felt grim satisfaction. It was poetic, almost biblical, reaping what they had sown. But another part, the part Ethan had always admired, felt uneasy. Something about it was too coordinated, too sudden. Families fall from grace, yes, but rarely with such precision. It wasn't until Adler called me late that night that the truth began to crack open. "Mara," he said, his tone clipped, "I received an anonymous email today. It was full of rumors about your family, claims of fraud, financial instability, manipulation. Whoever sent it clearly wanted to damage their reputation. Have you spoken to anyone about the forged loan?" My blood ran cold. "No, only you and the bank manager know." "Then someone else is spreading this," Adler replied. "And it's not random." I hung up, my heart pounding. If not me, then who? The answer came the following day, during an unexpected encounter. I had gone into town for errands when I saw Tessa stepping out of the bakery, her phone pressed to her ear. She froze when she spotted me. For a moment, guilt flickered across her face before she masked it with a practiced smile. "Mara," she greeted, but her voice was too bright, too careful. I studied her, the way her fingers tightened around her phone, the way her gaze skittered away from mine. A suspicion stirred. "How's Lydia handling the rehearsal problems?" I asked lightly. Her smile faltered. "Oh, stressful. But weddings are always chaotic." Something in her tone betrayed her. I remembered the whispers Adler had mentioned, the precision of the sabotage. And then it hit me. Tessa. My Tessa. Later that night, unable to shake the suspicion, I scrolled back through old messages she had sent. I noticed patterns I had ignored before, her too curious questions about Ethan's will, her probing about whether I'd discovered anything unusual, her subtle suggestions that maybe Lydia deserved a little help starting her new life. The realization was like being slapped. She hadn't just aligned with my family at the confrontation. She had been working behind the scenes to manipulate the narrative, to spread whispers that would corner me into submission. The vendors pulling out, the rumors of fraud. It wasn't fate. It wasn't justice. It was Tessa pulling strings. The betrayal twisted the knife deeper than anything my parents or Lydia had done. They were blood, and I had long suspected their selfishness. But Tessa had been my confidant, my chosen sister. She had known my darkest fears, my vulnerabilities, and she had weaponized that knowledge against me. I imagined Ethan's face if he had known. He had trusted her once too, had laughed with her at dinner parties, had called her family. The thought of his kindness being used as leverage sickened me. By Sunday morning, the cracks in Lydia's wedding plans had become fissures. Guests whispered openly about financial trouble. Some even called to ask if the event was still on. My parents scrambled to repair the damage, but the more they insisted everything was fine, the less anyone believed them. And through it all, Tessa's betrayal pulsed in my chest like a wound that refused to close. I sat alone at Ethan's desk, his letter beside me, and whispered to the empty room, "They think they can bury me with their lies. But you saw this coming, didn't you, Ethan? You always saw them for who they were." The twist had been revealed. Not just family betrayal, but betrayal by the one person I had chosen to trust. And with that revelation, the weight of injustice became almost unbearable. Yet beneath the ache, a flicker of something stronger began to burn. If Tessa thought she had cornered me, she had forgotten one thing. Silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. I knew suspicion wasn't enough. Adler had warned me that emotion without evidence was useless, and I could almost hear Ethan's voice echoing the same advice. If I wanted to survive this storm, I needed proof. Undeniable, unshakable proof. So I waited. Tessa called me late one evening, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Mara, you know this could all be easier if you just signed. Lydia's wedding wouldn't be falling apart. Your parents wouldn't be under so much stress. You're making this harder than it has to be." My chest tightened, but I forced my voice to stay calm. "Maybe you're right," I murmured. "Why don't you come over tomorrow? We'll talk." When she arrived, her hair was perfectly styled, her smile sharp enough to cut. She sat across from me at the table, sipping the tea I set before her. My phone lay between us, screen dark but recording, every word captured. "You don't understand," Tessa pressed, leaning closer. "Your parents are drowning. Lydia deserves this wedding. And if you gave up just a little, just signed over the shares or the house, they'd all be fine. Why cling so tightly to something that's only hurting everyone?" I let her talk, let her pour out her carefully rehearsed arguments. She didn't realize every word was being preserved. When she mentioned the vendors pulling out, I prodded gently. "Strange how fast the rumors spread, isn't it?" Tessa's eyes flickered, betraying her guilt. Then, almost too quickly, she admitted, "I only nudged things along. People needed to see your family for what they are. If you loved them, you'd give in." There it was, confession, plain as day. My stomach twisted, but I smiled faintly, nodding as though I agreed. Inside, I felt the recording sear itself like a weapon into my pocket. After she left, I immediately forwarded the file to Adler. His reply came within minutes. "This is exactly what we needed. Don't confront her yet. Let her reveal herself fully." The next twist came sooner than I expected. 2 days later, while scrolling through social media, I froze. There was Tessa, her arm looped around a man I recognized instantly, Grant's older brother, Michael. The caption read, Family dinners are the best when love is in the air. My throat went dry. It all clicked into place. Her betrayal wasn't just about loyalty to Lydia. It was about aligning herself with Grant's family, tying herself permanently to the glittering future my parents promised Lydia. If Lydia married into wealth, Tessa would be there too, tethered by romance to the family tree. I stared at the photo, the smile on her face a dagger. She hadn't just betrayed me for my parents. She had betrayed me for herself, for her own ambitions, her own hunger for security and status. The weight of it crushed me. Family betrayal was one thing. It was almost expected after years of favoritism. But Tessa? The friend who had been with me through college heartbreaks, who had held my bouquet at my wedding, who had cried with me when Ethan was in the hospital. She had weaponized intimacy itself, turned every secret I'd ever shared into ammunition for their cause. I sank into Ethan's chair, the room spinning. The invisible audience of my life would have gasped here, I thought. The story had deepened not with reconciliation, but with another twist of the knife. Betrayal not only by blood, but by the family I had chosen. For a long time, I couldn't move. The letter from Ethan lay in the lockbox nearby, reminding me of his trust, his foresight, and I realized that this moment, this deepest cut, was exactly what he had prepared me for. When all the pillars of my life crumbled, when even friends turned into enemies, he had left me armor I hadn't asked for but desperately needed. I closed my eyes and whispered into the silence. You were right again, Ethan. Loyalty is not blood. Loyalty is choice. And theirs was never me. The ache was unbearable, but beneath it lay a cold, steady resolve. I would not lash out. I would not scream. I would let the silence do what it always did, amplify their own corruption until it consumed them. The air inside Adler's office felt sharper than the winter outside. The conference room was lined with shelves of leather-bound law books, their spines stiff with authority. The long mahogany table gleamed under the overhead lights, already set with neat stacks of documents. I sat at one end, Ethan's will secured in front of me, my hands folded tightly in my lap. The door opened and my family filed in. My mother first, her heels clicking defiantly against the floor, followed by my father, jaw rigid, his presence heavy with unspoken threats. Lydia swept in behind them, her ring flashing, her smile brittle with practiced charm, and then, as if to twist the knife deeper, Tessa slipped in last, avoiding my eyes but taking a seat beside Lydia as though she belonged there. Adler entered, calm and deliberate, carrying a single folder. He placed it on the table, opened it slowly, and began to speak. We're here to address the estate of the late Ethan Collins. His will is clear, legally binding, and filed with the probate court. He leaves all assets, house, accounts, and company shares solely to his wife, Mara Collins. A silence settled like dust. My mother's lips parted as though to protest, but Adler raised a hand. There is also an addendum. Ethan anticipated potential disputes. In the event of a contest, a portion of the assets, namely company shares and liquid funds, would be transferred to the Cedarbrook Hospice Foundation. This clause makes any challenge not only futile, but self-destructive. My father's face darkened, his hand clenching into a fist against the table. Lydia leaned forward, her tone syrupy but trembling. That can't be right. Surely he meant for me to have something. Families don't cut each other out. Adler's expression didn't waver. He did, in fact, leave a provision, but it is conditional. The room stilled. I felt my pulse in my throat. Adler continued, his voice firm. Ethan established a scholarship fund in Lydia's name. It is substantial, enough to support her future and more. However, it is only activated if this family signs a written acknowledgement accepting the will without dispute. Furthermore, the scholarship will only be released if the family issues a public statement apologizing for failing to attend Ethan's funeral. Both conditions must be met. The words landed like a stone dropped into still water, rippling through the room. My mother's face blanched, her painted composure cracking. Lydia gasped, her hand flying to her chest. My father slammed his palm against the table. Humiliation. That's what this is. He's making a fool of us, even in death. Inside me, something steadied. The fairness of it was exquisite, justice sharpened into balance. Ethan hadn't just punished them. He had offered them a path to redemption, but only if they acknowledged their betrayal. Lydia turned to me, her eyes wide, shimmering with tears I couldn't tell were genuine or staged. "Mara, you could waive this, couldn't you? You don't need their apology. Please, just don't let my future depend on this." For a moment, the weight of her gaze pressed against me. Once, years ago, I might have caved. But now, the memory of the empty pews surged back, the silence at Ethan's grave louder than her pleas. Adler's gaze swept across them all. "The terms are non-negotiable. Contest the will, and the scholarship dissolves into the hospice fund. Refuse the apology, and it dissolves. Your choice is simple." The tension in the room swelled. My mother's fingers twitched as though she wanted to lash out. My father muttered something about family honor under his breath. Tessa's hand brushed Lydia's arm, a silent gesture of solidarity. I said nothing. I simply sat in silence, letting the weight of Ethan's words do what my own could not. For the first time since Ethan's death, the balance tilted in my favor. The law, his foresight, had drawn a line I could never have spoken myself. Watching their faces twist with rage, shame, and disbelief, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't known in weeks. Justice. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't joy. But it was enough. The silence after Adler's words was heavy, but not for long. My father's fist slammed against the table again, this time loud enough to rattle the water glasses. His face reddened, his voice breaking into a roar. "This is outrageous! Ethan was never loyal to this family. He knew nothing about duty, about legacy. You think we'll bow to his demands? Do you know what he was planning? He was going to sell us out, hand over his company shares to competitors." The room froze. My heart lurched at his words. Competitors? My father leaned forward, spit at the corners of his mouth. He discussed it with me once, years ago, said he was tired of carrying the company alone, tired of fighting the market. He considered selling shares to a rival firm. That's the man you're protecting, Mara, a traitor to his own family's standing. His attempt at justification made bile rise in my throat. For a moment, doubt pricked me like a thorn. Had Ethan truly thought of surrendering his life's work to outsiders? Then I remembered the USB I had discovered in his lockbox, the one he had labeled in his careful handwriting. I had not opened its contents fully, saving them for the right moment. This was that moment. Slowly, I reached into my bag and drew out the small drive. My family's eyes followed the motion, confusion crossing their faces. Adler raised a brow but said nothing as I slid it across the table to him. "Check it," I said quietly. Adler inserted the drive into his laptop. The screen illuminated with folders neatly arranged, financial reports, board meeting minutes, confidential correspondence. He clicked on a file marked Proposal, Contingency Plan. The room filled with a rustle of paper and the quiet hum of the laptop. Adler's voice carried as he read aloud. "In the event of my passing, under no circumstances are shares to be sold to competitors. A protective clause ensures retention within either my wife's authority or, failing that, the hospice trust. Any attempt otherwise will constitute breach of fiduciary duty." My mother paled. Lydia's lips parted in disbelief. My father's face froze mid-snarl, his argument disintegrating into silence. But Adler wasn't done. He opened another file. Emails exchanged between Ethan and his colleagues. One line stood out, stark and damning. "Robert has approached me twice, pressuring me to consider selling shares to third parties. I refused each time. I'm drafting protections to ensure he cannot override my decision." The room cracked under the weight of those words. I sat back, my voice steady, though my hands trembled under the table. "He never betrayed this family. You did, Dad. You tried to sell what wasn't yours. And now you sit here accusing him when the proof shows the opposite." For the first time, my father looked cornered. His mouth opened, closed, opened again, but no words came. My mother stared at him as though seeing him for the first time, her face blanching under the overhead light. Lydia shifted uncomfortably, her confidence faltering. Even Tessa seemed rattled, her fingers tightening around her phone. The cruelty of it hit me then. The naked truth. My father had been willing to gamble Ethan's life's work for his own pride. My mother had defended him. Lydia had cheered them on, and Tessa had joined in their chorus. The betrayal wasn't a slip of judgment. It was a strategy years in the making. For a moment, the despair nearly crushed me. This was my blood. This was the family whose approval I had chased all my life, and now, stripped bare by Ethan's foresight, their greed stood naked in the light. But then, like a tide turning, relief surged. Because the trap had closed, not around me, but around them. Adler cleared his throat, voice sharp as a gavel. The evidence is clear. Any further attempt to pressure Mara or to interfere with these assets will expose you to legal repercussions, including fraud and coercion. You are not in a position to negotiate. You are in a position to comply or face consequences. I met my father's furious glare with silence. For once, I didn't shrink under his authority. The law was louder than his threats, Ethan's foresight stronger than his fists. The air shifted. For the first time, they were the ones cornered, trapped by their own cruelty and by Ethan's preparation. And though grief still weighed heavy, I felt a surge of triumph, a fragile but undeniable rise above the ashes they had tried to bury me in. The day of Lydia's wedding arrived cloaked in gray clouds. The town buzzed with murmurs, but the whispers no longer carried admiration. Instead, they dripped with curiosity, even pity. Weeks of rumors had left their mark. The florist never returned. The caterer replaced the grand menu with simple buffet trays. The band canceled, forcing Lydia to hire a single violinist at the last minute. What had been envisioned as a glittering event was stripped bare, fragile and unimpressive. Worse still, a statement had appeared in the local paper 2 days earlier, signed by my parents and Lydia herself. It was short, almost begrudging, but undeniable. We regret our absence at Ethan Collins' funeral and recognize the pain it caused. We apologize publicly to Mara Collins and to all who witnessed our failure. The words looked stiff on the page, printed in black and white for the whole town to see. A public apology just as Ethan had required. I didn't attend the wedding. The invitation had never come, but even if it had, I would not have walked into that hall. I had no desire to watch Lydia smile through the shrunken spectacle of a celebration. No desire to stand in the shadows of people who had proven again and again that their love was conditional. Instead, I drove to the cemetery. The grass was damp with morning dew, the headstones glistening like slate polished by tears. I carried a bouquet of lilies, fresh and white, to replace the ones from the funeral that had long since withered. My heels sank into the soil as I approached Ethan's grave, the simple stone etched with his name steady against the shifting world around it. I knelt, brushing my fingers over the carved letters. They apologized, I whispered, though my voice sounded foreign in the open air. Not because they meant it, but because Ethan forced their hand. He always saw further than I did. A violin's faint notes drifted from across town, carried on the wind. Perhaps it was the lone musician at Lydia's ceremony. The melody was thin, almost mournful, and it felt fitting. I closed my eyes, letting the sound fade, and focused instead on the silence here. The silence that belonged to Ethan and me alone. I told him everything, as if he were listening. How the will had been read, how the scholarship depended on their apology, how my father's lies had unraveled with the USB, how Adler's voice had shielded me when mine might have faltered. I told him how Tessa had betrayed me, how even friendship had fractured under the weight of ambition. My words poured out like confessions, but instead of shame, there was strength in speaking them here, to him, where the truth mattered more than performance. When I placed the lilies at the base of the stone, I felt the tension in my chest ease. This grave was not a place of defeat. It was a place of clarity. They could strip away invitations, gossip, reputations, but they could not touch this, the bond between Ethan and me, sealed in trust and silence. Somewhere in town, glasses were clinking, vows were being exchanged, photographs taken. But here, only the wind moved, brushing through the trees like a gentle hand on my shoulder. And in that stillness, I realized I didn't envy Lydia her wedding, no matter how grand or how diminished. Because her day would always be shadowed by the truth, that her celebration had been bought with betrayal, her vows built on the rubble of silence forced into print. I rose slowly, brushing dew from my skirt, my eyes lingering on the headstone. "You were right, Ethan," I murmured. "Silence can be a blade, and today, it cut exactly where it needed to." The ache in my heart hadn't vanished, but it had transformed. No longer the raw wound of abandonment, it had become something quieter, stronger, a scar I could live with, the kind that reminded me I had survived. As I turned back toward the car, the clouds above broke just slightly, a pale shaft of sunlight spilling across the grass. It touched the lilies, making them glow as though Ethan himself had answered in kind. And I walked away, steadier than I had been in weeks, leaving behind not grief, but the calm certainty of strength reclaimed. The week after the wedding, Cedarbrook settled back into its rhythm, though whispers still floated through the air like ash after a fire. People spoke of the apology in the newspaper, of the stripped-down ceremony, of how quickly a family's reputation could unravel. My parents withdrew from public life. Lydia avoided social circles that once adored her, and Tessa vanished into the orbit of Grant's family, her betrayal tucked behind polite smiles. I, however, found myself in Adler's office once more. The scholarship fund Ethan had created still sat in its account, waiting like an unopened gift. By the terms of the addendum, it would only activate if the family signed the acknowledgement and apology, conditions they had finally, however grudgingly, met. The funds were ready to move. Adler looked at me across his desk. "It's your choice, Mara. You can let it dissolve into the Hospice Foundation, or you can authorize the release." I held the pen he offered, the weight of it balancing between justice and mercy. My first instinct was to let it dissolve. Why should Lydia, who had abandoned me at my lowest moment, benefit from Ethan's generosity? Why should my parents see her future funded when they had tried to strip mine bare? But then I thought of Ethan's handwriting in that letter, the one where he explained the scholarship. I wanted to give Lydia a chance, but only if she and the others could prove they deserved it. They had failed in almost every way, but they had done the one thing he required. They had apologized publicly where the whole town could see. It didn't absolve them, but it was more than I ever expected them to give. And maybe mercy wasn't about what they deserved. Maybe it was about who I chose to be now that Ethan was gone. I signed the authorization, but not in my own name. Instead, I typed the signature block EC and had Adler file it that way. When Lydia eventually saw the release paperwork, she would believe it had come from Ethan himself. Let her think it was his hand guiding her future, not mine. Let her feel gratitude toward the man she had disrespected rather than resentment toward the sister she had betrayed. The twist wasn't for them. It was for me. It was the final act of silence, the last blade turned merciful. That evening, I drove back to the cemetery with the confirmation papers tucked in my bag. I sat on the grass before Ethan's stone and laid them there, weighted with a single smooth rock. "I did it," I whispered. "Not for them, but for you. For us. Because I don't want to live with bitterness carved into my bones. You asked me to live, not just to fight." The wind stirred the lilies, carrying the faint scent upward. For the first time, I felt the ache of grief ease into something gentler. It no longer burned, it glowed. Across town, Lydia might never know the full truth. My parents might never guess whose hand had allowed the scholarship to breathe into life. Tessa might never realize that betrayal had not broken me. But that was the beauty of it. They didn't need to know. I knew. Ethan knew, and that was enough. I stayed at the grave until the sun sank low, painting the horizon in shades of gold and violet. The world felt quieter, steadier, as if the storm had finally passed. My story had not ended in vengeance, but in choice, a choice that gave me back the power they had tried to take. When I rose to leave, I touched the top of the stone gently, whispering a final vow. "I will carry your silence, Ethan, not as a wound, but as a shield. And when people remember me, they won't remember bitterness. They'll remember strength." I walked away, the path beneath my feet firm, the evening air cool against my skin. For the first time since the empty pews, I felt light. Not because the past had been erased, but because I had chosen how it would end. The line on the graph of my grief, once plunged into the deepest valley, had risen to its peak. And at that peak was not my family, not even Lydia, but Ethan's memory, steady and unyielding, guiding me into the future.